And when I was in acting school, one of the courses that we had was literature course, which was, of course, immediately one of my favorite courses. And the teacher asked us to write a story, a short story for one. And I hadn't done that really, to share with classmates or with anyone. And I ended up writing, of course, a really long one. It was like 12 pages. Really, really cheesy and corny now that I think of it. And something amazing happened as I was reading it, because as I progressed in my reading, I could hear my classmates turn quiet and paying attention. And when I finished, a couple of them were crying, because obviously my story was very dramatic, because I always veer toward that. And then the teacher turned to me and he said, "I don't know if you're going to be an actress, but you're a writer. That I can tell you right now."
Being an artist can be a heck of a ride, but you're not alone. On Journey of the Arts, we tell inspiring stories of artists and chat with those who support us on this path. I'm your host, Lola Opatayo, writer, editor, singer, and all-round lover of words. Come with me on the journey. Hello, and welcome to Journey of the Arts. If you love historical fiction or are in the process of writing one, this episode is just for you. Today's guest is Martha Bátiz, author of the recently released novel A Daughter's Place. The novel is based on the real lives of the daughter, sisters, niece, and wife of celebrated Spanish writer Miguel de Cervantes, author of Don Quixote, as they try to find their place in 16th century Spain. In particular, the story revolves around Miguel's daughter, Isabel, who finds out after her mother's death that her father is the renowned poet and war hero. Isabel is forced to pose as a maid and help her new family as they support her father in writing his famous work, Don Quixote. In doing so, she discovers secrets about her new family and struggles to find a sense of belonging in a society and country groaning under the weight of war, plagues, and colonization. A Daughter's Place showcases the strength of four remarkable women as they navigate a critical moment in Spanish history. It is out now from House of Anansi Press, and you can get a copy through the link in the description box or the show notes. And now a little about my guest. Martha Bátiz was born and raised in Mexico City, but has been living in Toronto since 2003. Her articles, chronicles, reviews, and short stories have appeared in diverse newspapers, magazines, and in over 30 anthologies in several countries. Martha has been featured in Latinos magazine among the top 10 most successful Mexicans in Canada and named one of the top 10 most influential Hispanic Canadians. She's the author of 2 short story collections in Spanish and English, the editor of the anthology Desde el Norte, and is part of the editorial committee of the successful books Historias de Toronto and Historias de Montreal. She holds a PhD in Latin American literature and is an ATA certified literary translator. Besides being the founder and instructor of the creative writing in Spanish course offered by the School of Continuing Studies at the University of Toronto, she's a part-time professor at York University, where she teaches Spanish language and literature, as well as translation and creative writing. You can find out more about Martha in the show notes or in the description box. And with that, I'll say welcome, Martha.
Thank you, Lola. I am so excited to be here and take this journey with you and with your listeners. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. I seriously hope I didn't butcher those names.
No, you did great. You did great.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So today we are discussing your amazing book, and I always like to show the book. Such a beautiful cover. A Daughter's Place looks like a painting. And I was telling you just before I started this recording that it's such a marvelous book. I think you use so many interesting techniques, and I learned a lot as a writer, and I'm just looking forward to all the things that we can discuss and the things that you share. Hopefully, put on your professor hat and share some of these techniques with us.
Thank you. Of course, I'll be very happy to, contribute in any way that I humbly can. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, before we begin the conversation, here's a reminder that you can find Journey of the Art wherever you get your podcasts. So check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms to listen on the go, follow the show, and leave a comment. This really helps to boost our visibility and grow the community. Also, I'd love to connect with you on Instagram, so please follow the show at Journey of the Art Pod. Finally, if you love the show, please don't keep it to yourself. Tell someone about Journey of the Art. All right, Martha, let's get into the conversation.
Let's go.
Let's go. To start us off, can you share a bit about your journey and why it is important for you to be a storyteller?
Well, I became a storyteller by accident, honestly. I ever since I was growing up, I loved books and I loved reading, and I was very nerdy that way, and I was always the one who, my teachers in school would always take off points because my compositions were endless, and that kind of thing. But I never thought I was going to be a writer, although in hindsight, I always loved writing, and I had the I think an ease for it. I didn't have necessarily, like skills per se, but when you read a lot, you acquire them even if you don't notice that.
Right.
And I went into acting school. Actually, I wanted to be, and I was for a long time, an actor in Mexico City. And when I was in acting school, one of the courses that we had was a literature course, which was, of course, immediately one of my favorite courses. And I was very happy to be reading and analyzing books and things. And then the teacher asked us to write a story, a short story for one. And I hadn't done that really, to share with classmates or with anyone, because I had written before, but only for myself, and everything was in the drawer. So I had to write a short story. And I ended up writing, of course, a really long one. It was like 12 pages. Really, really cheesy and corny now that I think of it. But I was young and I had no experience. And something amazing happened as I was reading it, because acting school, no one is really keen on me listening to stories.
Right.
But as I progressed in my reading, I could hear my classmates turn quiet and paying attention. And when I finished, a couple of them were crying, because obviously my story was very dramatic, because I always veer toward that. And then the teacher turned to me and he said, "I don't know if you're going to be an actress, but you're a writer. That I can tell you right now." So for me, that was like a lightning had landed upon my head, and I started thinking, maybe I could do this. And shortly after, I started looking into that and trying, and I was very lucky, because the doors that I went knocking on opened, and I started getting opportunities, and being close to people who became my mentors, and they were incredibly talented and generous. So it was really because of that class, because I don't think I would have otherwise necessarily gone that way.
Right. I love what you said about the generosity of others, because I think even the generosity of I guess it's your professor, or your instructor, to be able to tell you that you had something is so crucial. And sometimes I think there are many people who have stories under their skin, but there hasn't been anyone who's told them that they have it, right? So, I mean, I can actually say the same for myself. So I can relate to that, and I hope that more people are generous with compliments and generous with praise. Maybe not compliments, but praise and recognition.
Yeah, I fully agree, and I actually think that everyone
Mm,
has the ability to tell us. Everyone has a story.
Right.
more stories than one. Everyone has a life to tell if they want to tell it,
Right.
and I think that you don't need to be extraordinarily talented to tell the story. You can learn to tell a story quite decently,
Mm.
and well, to make it out of the ordinary, that's a different thing. But I think
Right.
everyone can learn to compose, to write something that is worth sharing with
Right.
others, and I think it's so liberating and so fulfilling to do that,
Right.
that I think everyone should try it, honestly.
Right. So I have a follow-up question based on what you just said. If you're saying that everyone has a story within them and that everyone can learn, we also know that not everyone's a good storyteller. So I guess my question then is, if everyone has a story to tell and everyone can learn how to tell a good story, what posture should they take to be able to go from having the story to telling it well?
Well, the having the ability to tell a story well, it's the same ability that you either have or don't have to tell a joke.
Hmm.
You can either tell a joke and make people laugh, or you can't.
Right.
But everyone can tell a joke, and sometimes even the people who tell a terrible joke make you laugh because it was so terribly delivered, right?
Right. Right.
Um, I think that the important thing, and this is what I always say in my creative writing courses, what you need to have is a desire to tell the story. Because if you don't have that physical need, and I describe it like a hunger, almost a thirst, a physical ache to tell that story, it's going to be very hard. If you're going to
Right.
tell the story because you want to, get an applause, be published, feel important, that's not the right way.
Hmm.
Everyone has a story that they are aching to tell. Now, those are the stories that are painful to tell.
Hmm.
Those are the stories that are very harder even to tell than any story, because of how much they mean to us. But if we
Hmm.
find a way to change a few facts, turn it into fiction, I do that with my students all the time. There is always a way, and even if the prose is not brilliant, even if to get a draft, as you will know, from its initial version to the final version, you have to spend months on it, and this is the key. I think everyone can tell a story. Now,
Right.
can you become a writer? That is a different thing, because to
Hmm.
become a writer, you need not only to have that yearning or that ache to tell the story, but you need to have the will to sit down and work on that draft for days on end, and go to version number 102 or
Hmm.
110 or whatever it needs until it's ready. And many people don't have that patience. That
Right.
kind of patience and devotion comes with the calling.
Hmm.
So sometimes, you can be a great writer of one story, the one moment you want to tell. That's fine. But if you want to be a writer, you're going to be, telling one story and then another story and then another story. And the
Right.
character is going to come and appear like a
Right.
ghost, as they do behind you, start, talking to you, write about me, write about me.
Right.
And you're going to listen to that voice and go on. And no matter how hard it becomes, and no matter how many times you fail, you're going to wake up the next morning and you're going to try again. It's like that, when you're a writer, you become Sisyphus.
Hmm.
You're like
That's true.
pushing that rock every single day, and you're going to get to the top, and then you
Right.
go back and start again from the bottom. That's how I have lived it, and that's, I think, the difference between writing one thing that is good and becoming a writer. But I think everyone can write something that's good.
Right. Amazing. I really do love how you responded, or what the content of your response, and I love what you said about the ache and about your desire. Like, everybody can tell a good story, but what takes you from the point of I can to I have is the desire. It's how much do you want it, and how much can you pay attention to that ache on your inside.
Hmm. Hmm.
So let's talk about the book now. Reaching for it again one more time. I know that one of the things that inspired the book is the amount of research that you had been exposed to in studying Miguel de Cervantes' works. But why was it important for you to tell the story? It could have been anybody else. Why him?
I don't know. I don't know. I discovered Isabel and she became this figure
Right.
looming over my head and I couldn't stop thinking about her. And years passed and I was still thinking of her. So I was doing my PhD at the University of Toronto, and my specialization was Latin American political theater, and my minor was Golden Age theater,
Mm-hmm.
Spanish Golden Age theater. So when I was I am always very nosy. I like to read about the lives of the playwrights and the writers, and because
Right.
I like to sniff connections. Oh, this must be referring to this or that. It
Mm-hmm.
just for fun, right? Not necessarily academics are not supposed to do that, and I know it. But it's the nosy me doing that, and so I had, of course, like all of the all of Spanish speakers know who Miguel de Cervantes was. He was our Shakespeare. One of our many,
Yeah.
this was a time in Spain where they had at least five writers of Shakespeare caliber,
Right.
really fantastic writers, and Cervantes was one of them. But he was different because he wrote in prose. Everyone was writing in verse. He was a poet. He could write poetry just fine, but he innovated. He did things differently, which gathered him the rejection of his peers.
Mm.
And he had this daughter that when you study his work in high school or whatever, you don't hear of that. So I came to the news of his illegitimate daughter later on, and I knew she was there, but had never really gone into detail about the relationship. But then I came across some piece of information that said that they had been long estranged, and by the time he passed away, the relationship was really bad.
Mm.
And of course, the accounts were like she was an ingrate and she was a brat and she had, given her father so much grief. And that immediately piqued my curiosity. I was like, what happened in this relationship for it to
Right.
have soured this way? And so I had to find it out. And I started, researching more. And the more I researched, the more I saw that Isabel had really been misunderstood. I think she was, if you put yourself, and this is something I do because I have an actor's training, I put myself in the shoes of the character.
Mm-hmm.
And if you put yourself in her shoes, you know, you understand that she, the way in which she was treated was not ideal,
Mm.
and she was hurt. And some people, when they are hurt, they lash out. And it's not that they are mean, it's that they
Right.
are hurt. And the only way in which they can defend themselves is by lashing out. So
Right.
I thought, I can empathize with this woman. I can understand where she's coming from. And I think a lot of people haven't understood that. So
Mm.
I was thinking, should I write a paper on this, an academic? But then, there's no proof of this. This is my intuition. I couldn't
Right.
have, like quote and say this shows that
That's
whatever on
true.
page. So I was thinking, how can I do this? And I thought, well, maybe I can write a short story, or I can, start thinking creatively about this. And in researching more about her, I started seeing the other women in the family and the other relationships, and I saw this was, the Cervantes family was a family that was very close. They really loved each other. They supported each other through thick and thin. And then all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
And it was, when I thought about it, I felt so sad for them. And so and all the facts were there. All I
Yeah.
had to do was just bridge them together.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like looking at this beautiful necklace
Mm.
and having all the beads.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, how I'm gonna connect them so that everyone sees the beauty that I am staring at right now. So
Yeah.
that really was how I decided to start doing this, because no one else had done it, and I was thinking, how come no one else has thought of this? I
Mm.
cannot believe that I'm the first one in
Yeah.
so many centuries to think that this was a family worth writing about in detail.
Right. And I think it's very courageous that you took it on, because we're often told as writers, write what you know. And with this, the Cervantes sisters are seamstresses. Isabel's family were tavern owners. And I don't know your history, but even if your family was in the bar business, I don't know if your family was in the dressmaking business. So I guess my question is, you can possibly understand Miguel because you're a writer, right? But you had to have centered yourself in a world that you didn't know. This was 16th century Spain, been ravished by plagues, war, the financial effects of colonialism and expanding the Spanish Empire. So you had to center yourself in a time that you were not aware of, and in occupations that you were possibly not aware of. How did you overcome that voice or that advice to write what you know, and just go for it?
Well, I think write what you know is great advice when you're starting off. I don't think it's a life sentence. It shouldn't be a
Mm.
life sentence. It would become very boring if you're only
Right.
writing about what you know. I think if you're going to write about something you don't know because you haven't experienced it yourself, you have the duty to research and to inform yourself and to have enough information as if you were there and as
Right.
if you had seen this and as if this had happened to you. And one thing that my PhD gave me was the ability to do that kind of research.
Right.
And so I gathered all the information. My family are all musicians. My parents are, they were both classical musicians, classical concert pianists. My father was an orchestra conductor. I cannot sew for my life. I tried to sew one thing, one time for my daughters, and they cried because I made it ugly. So, I for me this was truly a learning, a humbling experience, because I had
Mm.
to, get a lot of information on what they did, how they did it, what kind of materials they used, what were the taverns like, so I had to read a lot of books to
Right.
get that information. And I had to use my imagination as well, and I had to, look at paintings so I could get
Mm.
the visuals,
Mm.
because that's the only resource that we have, right? The
Mm.
paintings. So I was looking at all the paintings I could find online. I took a trip thanks to the Canada Council for the Arts. I have to thank them. I took a trip to Spain. I saw the houses where a few of the ones that are still standing, the houses where Cervantes lived, walked down those streets. So I really wanted to go and see all these things.
Mm.
Again, I had been in Madrid before, but never with the eye of a researcher, never with the eye of a writer. I have been there to party and to, look at the history and have a good time. This was an entirely different trip. And I think that gave me the tools I needed
Mm.
to start recreating that. So
Yeah.
yes, write what you know when you're starting off, but after that, research, do your homework, and feel free to, write about things that seem important to you.
Right.
I fought with myself a lot, and that's the last thing I'm gonna say, not to make this answer too long. Because I'm Mexican, I'm not Spanish. And Cervantes is the biggest writer in the Spanish language. Like, you go to Spain and there are, statues of Don Quixote everywhere, and Instituto Cervantes is the most important institution.
Mm.
So, the Spanish language is la lengua cervantina. Like, Cervantes is omnipresent. And
Mm.
I was thinking, will they take it badly that a Mexican who lives in a Mexican Canadian, a Mexican who lives in Canada is writing about their, most iconic writer in English,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and airing all the dirty laundry on top of that, because I
Yeah.
was looking for all the juicy gossip and making up whatever gap was there. I had to get from point A to point B, and if point B was a disaster, something terrible had to happen in the meantime. So
Yeah.
I had to think what was terrible for the time that I could make up.
Mm.
So I was afraid that maybe I had no right to tell this story, because now we're living in a time where they say if you're not Mexican, you cannot write about Mexico,
Yeah.
for example.
Yeah.
But I think as an actor and I have an actor's training that I use for everything in my life,
Mm.
everything really, even when I'm teaching, everything I learned then those are the tools with which I work. As an actor, you put yourself in the minds and in the body of a mother who has lost her child.
Mm.
Why do we need actresses who have lost their children so that they play that role, and if they haven't lost their children they cannot play it? That's not the way it
Yeah.
goes. So I with that kind of mindset, I gave myself permission to do this with the arguing that I informed myself, I did my due diligence, I did my homework, and I'm doing this with respect
Mm.
to the women, respect to Cervantes,
Yeah.
and with love. Love for him because he was a fantastic writer. He must have been a fantastic man. I am sure of it. He was very, loved by most people, except for, by the people who envied him. But he was a fantastic guy, and these women were also brave and brilliant. And I love Spain. Like, half my family, my heritage comes from Spain. So I thought, well, I'm granting myself permission because I am not going to butcher this. I am going to hopefully uh, rekindle an interest within English speaking readers for the figure of Cervantes, because he should be reread again. He should be, part of our conversation, and these women need to be known, and that his daughter especially needs to not be treated so harshly. She doesn't deserve that.
Yeah.
So that's my story.
Yeah, I think you really did pay homage to them. There is so much dedication that is evident in the book, not just in your portrayal of Cervantes, but of the sisters of Isabel. And I think one of the things that I appreciate the most about your book is how there's a microscope on each character. And I guess the fact that you use different voices helps us to see why they made the decisions that they made. I mean, like, apart from Miguel, we don't really know why he does some of the things that he does. And I'm going to be saying Miguel and Cervantes interchangeably, but
That's fine.
hopefully people can follow along. But I want to zoom in on the four characters that tell the book, so the four narrators, and that's Catalina, Constanza, Isabel, as well as Magdalena. Why was it important for you to explore the story through the eyes of the four women? Why not two? Why not one?
Well, my editor wanted one because he thought it was going to be faster for me to write it and it was going to be easier. And we had a little bit of a discussion. I won, but
Clearly.
but we did, dog, I love you. But we did have an argument over that tiny argument. Because he said, I think Isabel is the most important character, and you should just write about her. But then, she was betrayed. Secrets were kept from her. All of these things were happening behind her back. That I thought, if I just focus on her, like 80% of the fun is going to be out of the book.
Yeah.
And I needed the presence of the other women to underscore how extraordinary Isabel was, because what she managed to do with her life, especially taking into consideration how she arrived into the family is nothing short of extraordinary for her times.
Right.
And because, the other women also had worthy, stories to tell. And I wasn't going to be able to portray the huge heartache of that family falling apart if it had just been Isabel.
Right.
I needed the full view. And I remember, having the early discussions with Doug, and him saying, well, you have to convince me we need 4 narrators, and I was like, okay, I will. So I came back home, redrafted, reworked, which goes back to what we talked at the beginning. You need to be, as a writer, open to getting feedback that says start all over again.
Right.
And you have to, put your head down, and if you really want to tell the story, you have to do that, especially when the advice comes from someone who knows more than you.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, I am going to, find a way to prove that I need 4 narrators. And then it was very nice when I went to the office and he was like, okay, keep your 4 narrators. That felt like a huge triumph.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it really did work. And I think one of the reasons why it worked is the fact that each narration is brief. Like, it's not too long that we're dwelling on what, for instance, Constanza is saying. We see what Constanza is saying, but in a concise manner. And then we move on to what Isabel is saying. So we don't get a sense that one person is telling all of the story. And I think it brings such an honesty and transparency to the story that we're able to really get this big picture. Because Isabel has come from a really tough background. She has been the victim of patriarchy and abandonment. And we sympathize with her, but we also sympathize with Constanza, whose life has been upended because this more beautiful cousin has come into, the family and has taken the attention away from her uncle. And we also see, that difference between Magdalena and Andrea and Catalina. Like, all these voices are so important to show us a different side of the story. So I think it's so wonderful that you chose that technique, and I think it worked. So the only other question I have with regard to this is, I was just talking earlier on, I was talking about how their voices were unique. Each person's voice was distinct. I didn't feel like I was reading Isabel's voice in Magdalena's voice. And for instance, Catalina's narration is essentially a prayer. Every time she's narrating the story, she's basically praying to the saints, and her actions are aligned with her prayers. So Constanza is the same. The jealousy and impatience she feels for Isabel in her narration comes through in her actions throughout the book. So we can see that the voices are true to the characters. How are you able to color each voice differently? And what are some strategies that you use to ensure that each character had their own voice?
I think that was the hardest part. And that took a lot of rewriting at the beginning. I think, the first 80 pages of that book, I lost count how many times I rewrote them, threw out stuff, started again, tried something different. At the beginning, I had both Isabel and Constanza narrating in first person. But then I thought, and also talking with my editor and also with friends, because I have a few friends who are my victims and they read my stuff and give me feedback. So one of them said, well, really, if you want to differentiate them, maybe you should do Isabel in first person and Constanza in third. And so I had to rewrite everything. And I was already in page 90 and I had to go back. And when you're starting from a different point of view, you have to scrap everything.
Yeah.
It's not just a matter of changing I for she. It's the whole vision.
You have to rewrite
changes.
whole
You
sections.
rewrite the whole. Yeah, exactly. So I did that. It was okay. I am very docile. in that if I have to rewrite something, I don't get angry. I do it, because I want to write something that's good, and if it's not
Right.
good, I am not, I'm not attached to any of that. I just like, out we go.
Right.
And so that helped, having first and third. And then with Magdalena, it was easy because I had already decided these are going to be letters with her, letters to Miguel, because that's how we're gonna, reveal the secrets that are being kept from Isabel and from Constanza and
Right.
all that. And then with Catalina, it was trickier because, she arrived into the book later.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think that she was gonna be a part of it, but then she had to. It was like she was like, "Hello, I'm
Yeah.
here." So I was thinking, how do I already have first person, third person. I have the letters, which are also first person, but it's a different register because it's a different character. So, and they are shorter, so it's easier. And the format is different, so that helps. And then what am I gonna do with this woman? So I was thinking, well, she was very pious, very religious. How about, have
Right.
her be praying, but then also her parts are also the parts, where there's the most, sex. And
Yeah.
you would, I had a friend who said, I cannot believe that you had, this
This
character
pious woman.
praying, and this pious woman talking about the sex, wonderful sex she had with her husband. And I was thinking, well, who else was she gonna be telling this
Yeah.
to at a
Yeah.
time where, she would have probably been, I don't know, considered a sinner, a horrible person, if she ever
Yeah.
mentioned this to anyone. I don't think women spoke that way before, but I think if we believe in God, in the God that she believed in, as the pious, generous, fatherly figure, she
Mm.
can go and confide in him and
Right.
say, this is what makes me happy, and this is what is making me sad, and this is what makes me worried. Help
Right.
me, and I was thinking it works, I think, for her character,
Right.
and for that precise moment in time. Obviously, society has evolved. Now we go and tell this kind of thing to our best friends. We don't go and say it, we don't pray that kind of thing. But I think back
Right.
then she must have been very lonely. He left her for years on end for his
Yeah.
travels. She was, alone, taking care of her estate. She wanted so desperately to have a child, and she didn't.
Yeah.
So to help her in that loneliness that I envisioned, I thought praying was the perfect solution for
Yeah.
her, dramatically and also in terms of the character's needs.
Yeah. I think it was so marvelously done. And
Thank you.
I love the fact that this character, who is the most pious of them all, is the only one who's actually talking about sex.
Yeah.
The other ones do not talk about it. They, in fact, pretend when they're being accused of being whores. She's the only one who actually talks about it. So I think that was very clever. And there's just so much to learn from you from this
Yeah,
book.
well, I thought, if you think of just the historical facts, Catalina and Miguel had a fantastic marriage despite his absences, despite everything that happened, and she loved him to the end. Even if she went to the convent and she did everything, she was there for him
Yeah.
all the way to the end. So I was thinking, what can keep two people together like that and establish such a deep bond? It's yes, it's of course the way that she was very clever, and this is
Right.
also factual. She was a very clever woman, and I'm sure that she was helping as he was writing. She must have been his beta reader. I'm not, this is my hypothesis, but I think it's very logical to think in those terms.
Mhm.
They must have had an incredible chemistry.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone, because we think of these historical figures as these people who never sweat, and who are like untouchable and perfect and
Hmm.
whatever. And I wanted to bring Cervantes down from that pedestal and turn him
Yeah.
into the husband, and turn him into a brother, and turn him into a father, and
Yeah.
make him a man, a human being. in relation to these women,
Yeah.
because he's not the protagonist, they are. But I wanted him to feel like a real human, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I certainly felt the humanity of Miguel, especially in the parts where things start to sour between him and Isabel, where we truly see him as a father and not the writer, not the celebrity, not the government official, but Miguel as a father. So I see what you were trying to do, and I think in the end, what we really see is the humanity of each character, so that we can understand why they chose the life that they did. And maybe they didn't choose it, but the life that was given to them, or the life that God gave, that they were left with. For instance, Constanza is, I don't want to give too much away, but Constanza is the one who's with Cervantes at the end. And when we think about the desires that she had at the beginning, you feel so much sympathy for her, so much. In fact, I think she's the one that I sympathize with the most. She's the villain in the story to a large extent, but she's the one that I sympathize with the most, because she started out her life sort of privileged, but she got the wrong end of things. So I'm going to leave it at that so that people can go and read it.
Go and see. Well, I love that you say that, because for me that character was hard to flesh out, precisely because yes, she's the villain, but she's also not the villain.
Yeah.
She had a hard time, and life dealt her bad cards.
Yeah.
And it's not that she was mean, it's that she was unlucky that way.
Yeah.
And that I didn't want to have a villain, like evil, person,
Yeah.
because she's good too. She has, I think, what I wanted to do with all of these characters is show them at their best and show them at their worst, like
Yeah.
real people. We're not always good, we're not always bad. We're bad when we need to be. We're
Yeah.
good most of the time, and that's true for them too.
Yeah. Absolutely. So speaking about voices, Andrea's voice is the only missing one of the women, almost as if she's disposable. And in the book, she's the first to die. Can I ask why her character or her voice was excluded?
Oh, because Doug wouldn't have let me have 5 narrators, and no, that's not true. Doug, you would have. No, it's probably because she and Magdalena lived together and they did everything together. So I thought that by having Magdalena write those letters saying everything that was going on in the house, and by showing Andrea in relation to her daughter, I could paint her enough that she didn't need an extra voice, because an extra voice would have needed new information.
Yeah.
Extra information that she wouldn't have been able to give, because that's what Magdalena was for. And Magdalena is the strongest of the sisters, and she was the favorite sister of, the closest one to Cervantes. So I thought, I don't need to give Andrea a voice. She will have a strong presence with her daughter, with her sister, in all the family scenes.
Yeah.
But because she wasn't going to bring any new information to the table, she had to take the back seat in the car.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I missed her though. I missed her voice.
Thank you.
Well,
That's very nice
another
of you to say.
thing that really stood out to me in the book is the amount of injustice that we see in 16th century Spain. First of all, we see injustice in the military. So I think his name is Rodriguez.
Rodrigo. Rodrigo is Miguel's brother.
Miguel's brother. So he doesn't get the promotion that he deserves, and neither does he get the pay that he's owed. And he doesn't get it. His family doesn't get it until I actually don't know if they ever got that money.
They didn't.
So that's one injustice. We see the injustice of the monarchy, milking the people, taxes and all of that, we see the women in that time whose lives were determined by men who had their own agenda. Isabel and her family would have, probably been hung or sentenced to death or sent to prison because somebody was having an affair with somebody else's wife and they wanted to cover things up. So there are so many layers of injustices, even with Isabel's mother and her mother's business being taken away from her. And as you show the injustices that are at home within the Spanish people, you also show the injustices that were done to people who were not Spanish. So I'm talking about the Moors. And I think that it's wonderful that you highlighted the role of the Moors in Spain. And at the time of the book, it seems that their influence had dwindled. So the Moors they were not black Northern Africans, and neither were they white Arabs. They were people from a certain region who had moved to Spain and, exerted so much influence in math and science and arts. And at the time of the book, their influence had dwindled, and the king was now expelling them or forcing them to marry Catholics or become Christians themselves. Can you talk a little bit about this aspect of history and why it was important to include it in the book?
Yes, thank you for asking. Well, the 17th century Spain, 16th, 17th century Spain was a very important period because, when Spain became a country, and that was in 1492, when the Catholic king and queen Isabel and Fernando took Granada and the, Andalusia, which is the south of Spain, the part where the Muslims, used to live. And they force the Spanish language and the Catholic religion for everyone in the nation in 1492. And that's the same year that Christopher Columbus arrived in the Americas and the Spanish Empire starts to exist as such. With all the riches they are basically stealing from our lands. And a century later, all of these riches had been spent. There were wars on many fronts. The kings who had been brilliant, rulers had died. And there was this prince who became king, Philip III, who was dumb in power. And so, he was manipulated by his secretary. He was really the one governing and making the decisions and whatever, because the king wanted to be, I don't know, outside playing and hunting and whatnot. And Spain had this very, very rich mix of cultures and religions. There was a very powerful Jewish population. Before Queen Isabel la Católica, there was a very powerful Muslim population, and they got along well. They exchanged knowledge. The first school in translation, where the wise men exchanged knowledge and translated texts from one language to the other, was there. And then it all was destroyed by this idea that only Catholicism could be accepted. And by the time that my novel starts, the empire had already started to decline. They had lost a very important battle against England, and of course, the war against England was important because England was Anglican and they were Catholic, so it was a religious kind of war as well. But it was also because who has the biggest empire. So it's also a very manly thing of who has it bigger, you or me, that kind of thing. And Cervantes had traveled basically everywhere around the Mediterranean. He went to war. He was then captured and was in Algiers for 5 years, held as prisoner. And in those experiences he had in traveling through Spain and in traveling abroad, and this is present in his text, he developed a huge appreciation for for Moors and for everyone. This is why I say this was a great guy, but he couldn't say it publicly, because if he had said it publicly, he would have been burned or put in jail or whatever, because you were not allowed to say that. What did he do instead? He portrayed characters that had been wronged in the same way that people were being wronged, out in the streets,
Right.
and they elicited compassion. And through that, you can see how he thought. But because, these are the characters that Don Quixote encounters or whatever, he could, be excused and not be censored, because this was all fantasy, right?
Yeah.
But I think it was a very strong message for him. I think he was a very compassionate man. He was, as I said, ahead of his times. He was a proto-feminist. I am convinced of it.
Yeah.
He was a man that could see the good in people and their value beyond their skin color and beyond their faith, which was unthinkable back then. Even though he was absolutely, Catholic, he would have never sworn away from that religion or anything. But he was a true Christian in his generosity, I think, and in his valuing of others as not as the other, but as another human being.
Yeah.
So that it was very important for me to put it there, because I think that's also one of the things that made this family different from other families, and that's why they were being picked on all the time. They were not, the Cervantes family was not a standard family of the time. They were different, and that's what makes them extraordinary, and that's what makes them so interesting to write about.
They were different. I mean, these were a bunch of women who were sort of living life on their own terms, but they still leaned toward Cervantes's direction and guidance as the head of the family. And we see each one of them was industrious. Even Isabel, who lived away from them for a period of time before she came to live with them, was very good with numbers and accounting and taxes and things like that. And the women were good with designs and their clientele were the rich and the famous in the society. So these women were trying to live up to the standard of their time while setting their own standards for their own lives. And I think they paid a heavy price for that. When I think about all of them, I don't know that they actually, I don't think any one of them would have anticipated the end that they got. Obviously, nobody wants to have a sad ending, but I think the price that they paid for their independence was heavy. Each one of them. I mean, maybe except Isabel. Isabel seems to be the only one who got exactly what she wanted. I mean, apart from the fact that she didn't have her own child, but maybe I actually do think that she would have wanted that. I think she gave up on love after a while, and maybe that's why she didn't go on to have her own children. But they all paid a heavy price for the lives that they lived. And when I think about, the struggles that women face now and the struggle to, for instance, get equal pay, same level of, some people don't have maternity leave like we do here in Canada, and all these types of conversations that are happening. I see the long distance that we've come from. I mean, this is in Spain, but it's the world that we live in right now. So they were exceptional women. I agree with you.
Yeah, thank you.
So there are 4 parts in the book, and each one is preceded by a note about the era in which the characters are living or about to live in. And I think this was such a clever way to avoid stuffing the prose with facts so that the reader can focus on the fiction. So I want to ask very quickly, how are you able to sieve your research to determine what to include and what not to include?
I don't know. It was all very um intuitive, I
Mm,
think. I knew that the those historical openings could only be a page long, not longer. I think one of them goes a little bit longer, but it's like one page
right,
tops, because I just wanted to give context, and I know that we know what happened in England at the time, but not necessarily what happened in Spain at the time.
right,
So I wanted to just fill in for that and just give the highlights. Like I was thinking of how at the end of the year the newspaper publishes most important news of
right,
the 10 top
right,
10 most important news. So I was like, okay, top 10 most important things that happened in this period, especially the ones that would affect the character. And for that, my editors, my editors and everyone at House of Anansi were fantastic, because it was Dog, who said we only need the information that affects the characters. This is
mm,
not, and he helped me, because as a researcher I wanted to put more information, because
right,
this was where I put on my professor hat, and then
right,
this happened and that happened, and you could write incredibly long, about those things, because they are fascinating. Like the
right,
history of Spain is so rich and interesting. But he was like, no, we need to stick to the things that affect our characters, and everything else goes out. So he helped me, cut out the information that wasn't indispensable, and that's why
mm,
we only left what was really really important. And I think that was great on his part
yeah,
to know to help me do that.
yep. As an editor, I'm very happy to hear that because
Yeah.
many writers don't listen to the editor.
I know. You know what? You don't know how many times I have heard it when I work with an editor and they say, "Oh, I wish everyone were like you," because as I said, I'm very docile.
Mm,
I am, unless I am really convinced of something, like the four narrators.
yeah,
I was ready to go, like this with Dog on that.
mm,
But other than that, I think that when you are in the middle of the forest and you cannot see what's beyond, you need those eyes.
mm,
And if you're working with an editor, it's because you trust those eyes. Why would you
right,
not trust them? Uh, and you can, and even if you don't, you give it a try.
right,
If those eyes say it's that way, you walk that way. And maybe you get there and it's like, no, it wasn't here.
yeah,
That's fine, but you have at least done it. You explored, you learned something, you go back to the drawing board and start again.
right.
So, a lot of, I know a lot of writers make a big deal about, someone telling them, oh, move this comma, change this sentence. But as I said, I don't fall in love with anything I write. I don't consider anything I write an extension of my body or myself.
Mhm,
I don't feel hurt if I need to cut it. If I need to cut it, I cut it. And if it's for a good cause, I am very grateful for the feedback that points me in the right direction, because sometimes I don't see it.
yeah,
And sometimes I make mistakes.
yeah,
And if they make a mistake, then we make the mistake together and we walk back. The good
right.
thing about writing is you can always delete and start over.
That's true. That's a fantastic way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Martha, for coming to chat with me about your book. I've had a wonderful time. I've learned a lot from you. And I think the biggest lesson I've learned from you today is don't be afraid to pull it apart and build what needs to be built. I think there's a fear of, well, what if I can't build it? Well, if you built it before, maybe you can build it again. So thank you for sharing that.
No, thanks to you, Lola. I really appreciate the chance to talk to you and to your listeners, and I congratulate you on this show, and I wish you the best of successes with it and with your writing and your
Thank
editing. And
you.
I hope that as an editor, your writers are going to see that we need the editor's eyes and the editor's
Yeah.
input. And I am always very, very grateful when someone wants to work with me on that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for listening to our show today. Thank you for joining us. If you have any questions, any feedback for Martha, feel free to drop that in the comments right here on YouTube or on Spotify if you're listening on there. If you would like to get A Daughter's Place, you'll find the links in the show notes or the description box. I will catch you in the next episode.
Thank you.
On the next episode, I'll be chatting with another inspiring artist. But before then, I'd love to hear from you. Tell me what you think about this show and this episode. Feel free to drop me a note here or send me a DM on Instagram at Journey of the Art Pod. Finally, please subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube, or follow and rate the show if you're listening elsewhere. Help me connect with other artists who need a dose of inspiration today. Until next time, stay on the journey of your art.